So in this video, I want to explain the difference between odds and probability, which that is one of the questions in the Chapter 7 review reading assignment, and also you have to deal with that in 7.5. Okay, so usually when we hear about odds, we often hear about odds when it comes to sports, okay? Let's just say a team is 5 and 8. Okay, so 5 and 8, that would mean wins to losses. Okay, so this is called our odds. Okay, and usually when we talk about odds, we're comparing an event to the complement of the event. Like a complement is what's not happening. Like, for example, if you're not winning, then you're losing, okay? So these are odds. Now with probability, that's a little different. If we looked at the probability of winning, that would be 5 out of 13. Okay, now where did 13 come from? 13 is the total number of games. Out of 13 games, the team won 5 games. Okay, so our probability as of event E, that's how often E occurs, divided by the total number of occurrences or items in the sample space. So let's do another one with probability versus odds. And suppose you go to a horse race and your odds are 14-1 against. So that means if for every dollar you bet, odds are against you. So for every dollar you bet, if you win, if your horse wins the race, then you're going to get $14 for each dollar you bet. Okay? So the probability of that horse winning would be 1 out of 15 races. So if this particular horse were to race 15 times, 14 times the horse will lose, and 1 time it's going to win. Okay, so the first number represents the number of times that the horse will lose the race versus the number of times the horses will win the race. Okay, so let's just say, for example, I were to bet on the horse races, which, but I would want a safer bet. Okay, my safer bet would actually be a bet such as 5-1. Okay, if the bet is 5-1 against, then that means that the horse will win 1 race for every 5 races that the horse will lose. Okay, so this would be a safer bet. In fact, my chance of winning is going to be a lot better. I'm going to have a better chance of winning here. So the probability of winning would be 1 out of 6, because I have 1 win out of 6 races. Okay, So if you were to calculate, usually when we see probabilities, we say them as percentages. So if we were to calculate these two probabilities, okay, we had the 14-to-1 odds with a probability of 1/15, and then we have the 5-to-1 odds with a probability of 1/6. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Okay, 14-to-1 versus 5-to-1. Okay, so if you have a calculator, we are going to take our numerator divided by our denominator, which I just happen to have a calculator here. Isn't that amazing? Being a math teacher and all. 1 divided by 15. I have 0.06666. So I'm going to multiply that to 100%. Which is going to give me about 6.7%. Okay. So fractions represent division. You divide the top by the bottom, numerator divided by denominator. So I only have a 6.7% chance of winning. Okay. Whereas in the other one, 1 divided by 6, I have 0.166, and with a repeating 6, okay, 0.16666 goes on forever, which multiplied to 100% would be 16.7%. Okay, so the odds are much more generous that I'm going to win in the 5-to-1 rather than the 14-to-1. And this can be a little confusing because if I won this race here, I would win a lot more money because I would get $14 for every dollar I bet. But it is a lot less likely to win in a 14-to-1 odds against versus 5-to-1 odds against. So in a nutshell, when you're looking at probabilities versus odds, okay, odds compare wins to losses quite often. And we usually see a semicolon. Or losses to wins. So usually when we see an odds such as 14-to-1 and the first number is bigger, that's usually your odds against. And often the odds is described so people know how much they would win if they were to bet. Or losses to wins. Okay, these are our odds. Whereas with probability, okay, probability describes the proportion of time the horse wins or the team wins. So when we say probability, think of proportion, like the probability that the horse wins would be the number of wins over total races. Okay, or a probability that the horses lose or the team loses, for example. You can think of, rather than races, maybe you have games. The probability that you win would be the number of times you win over total games. So if you were doing 7.5 and you're a little confused about the difference between odds and probability and how to go from one to another, that's really understandable, because often when you hear odds being thrown out there in sports, it's never really discussed what that means, wins to losses versus probability. So I hope that helps. And so you do have that as an issue in 7.5, and that is the last question on the reading assignment for the Chapter 7 review.